Welcome to Renaissance Bookbinding. This is the library in which I work much of the time, figuring out what's here, what needs to be saved first, what needs to be preserved as it is. Here we are back at home, where I do much of my filming. We are moving along quite well with our little Napoleon book. The signatures are ready to be bound into a text block. Now, instead of using a sewing frame, I'll use clips for this. It's a lot cheaper, and sewing frame's not crazy expensive, but I don't have one here with me right now. And I could borrow one from the castle. I can make one quite easily, but I'll show you how to use clips to very inexpensively keep your book in the right position while you're sewing. Now you'll notice the little cardboard pieces. That is to protect the pages. And the thread, I think I'll use this gold thread. It's a nice color. It kind of matches okay with the color of the pages without looking tired or old. If you see here, the kind of a golden hue to the pages. So I'll count up my signatures, including one for each of the end papers. And I want that many lengths of thread plus one. If you're doing a very large book, you won't want to do, 200 signatures or anything like that. It'd be just an unwieldy amount of thread. You can do what's called a weaver's knot to attach threads in the middle. We'll do that at some point and show you as well some of our larger books. And by the way, we have a few interesting projects that we could do next. There's a 300-year-old Greek Bible. There's some East India Company books with some very nice maps and fold-out things in there. So if you have any requests, jump onto the comments down below and let me know, and I'll see what I can do. This is a neat little way of having an almost flush knot with the end of the needle. Very easy to undo as well when we're done. So make sure that our first hole is clear, and we've begun. We want to leave the tail hanging out so that we can secure the thread when we come back down to this end of the book. But for the moment, on this first signature, our main goals are to get the tapes in the right place. If you've watched the videos on how to make your own journals, you'll know that the tape you want to use should be strong and not stretchy, and it should have lots of kind of pores or spaces in it that allow the glue to grip it really tightly. And these are a really good choice. Hessian ribbon, I think it's called. And I thank the Hessians because it works really well. So we'll pull this loop down to a manageable size. And in it goes. Tighten it up a bit. Being sure not to pull that end through. And then we'll weave through all three of them. So all three of them in. And the next signature goes on. We open it to the halfway point, to the inner fold, and open it up, and we will clip the lower fold to the early signature, the end paper in this case. Put those protective cardboard pieces because the paper's old and might be a bit brittle. You don't want to have sharp edges pressing onto it, so just as an extra precaution, we will Drop that on there. So with half of the signature open, we can continue our sewing. This is a really kind of zen, satisfying part of doing this book, doing any book, because you start to see these loose pieces coming together into a text block, into what's functionally a book. And it starts to gain weight as you go through it. The complexity of the little stitches on the spine take shape. It's very satisfying. Here I'm doing a knot to secure up the end of the book. You see how tightly those two signatures are together. You want to tie it as tight as you can get it without ripping the paper. That's the sweet spot. And a little bit of experience will have that happening before long. Occasionally, if there's a little tear or something from too much enthusiasm, it's a bit cringing when you're dealing with a 200 or 300-year-old book. So here I'll add another signature, open it halfway, make sure that the page numbering is continuous and that the top of the book is still at the top and you don't have an upside down signature in the middle. Line it up, put our little protective cardboard pieces on there, and on goes the clip. That's my Blackfriars College mug in the foreground, which is interesting because it's actually Blackfriars Hall. It functions as a college, but technically it's a hall. I don't know why the mug says college, other than the fact that if you didn't belong to it, you probably wouldn't know the difference. There isn't much of a difference between a hall and a college. Okay, you'll see as I'm sewing along the spine, I'm tipping in underneath the last thread that's come across. And as the book builds, that'll create a really pleasing criss-cross shape up the spine. But more importantly, it'll add strength to the spine in holding those signatures together in a uniform, snug manner. There I go underneath the last thread, not all of them, just the last one. Pull it through, and then back through the signature. From about this point on, the book gains enough weight of its own that it's really nice to work with. As it gets thicker, bigger clips. You don't have to clip the whole book where you finished. You could clip the last 8 or 10 signatures and it would work. But clipping the whole book just prevents little accidental folds, maybe rips and things that could happen with pages flapping on the bottom. I'll do my kettle stitch at the end. Pull that through. And I wish you could feel this book. It is such a nice, secure, tight construction. It's coming together really well. A few of our potential projects there in the background. That Greek Bible. There are also some very nice botanical books with images of plants and flowers and berries and things that would be nice. And there we go. That is our text block for Napoleon Anecdotes. It is now readable. You could sit and read that and, if you're careful, not damage anything. However, the purpose of the covers, or the case as they're called in bookbinding, is to protect the text block. And I would argue there's meaning conveyed through the physicality of the cover as well. We'll get into that later maybe. So we're adding some glue. It adds some strength. It's also in preparation for adding the spine on the book. Every step just makes the text block feel more robust and secure. So now that we're dry and the pages aren't going to be shifting up or down, they're very securely held together with the tapes and the sewing. It is a solid block. Let's make the edges pretty. This is a very satisfying tool, the guillotine cutter. You can use a plow cutter, or some people will use just a flat chisel or razor to get the same effect. Sometimes by hand is a better effect, but that's okay because we have a way to refine the guillotine cut. Ah, feels so good. There are some projects underway. You can see some thicker books there. Now a little sandpaper around the bone folder, and we're just going to smooth out. You can use 400 or 800 to take that down a little bit, and then smooth it out, and we are ready for further decoration. Use a pH balance acrylic for this, so that long term the book will not get deteriorated by the acid in it. You won't notice any difference on a book that you think might last 20 years. It doesn't matter. You can use almost anything. Even 50 years would be fine for most books, but much older than that, and you start to want to use archival materials. And putting archival on the front of something really makes it more expensive, like putting marine in the front. Marine mechanics are way more expensive than regular ones, even though similar engines. So here we're putting on a nice little splatter effect. Similar visual effect to the marbling, but little points instead of big bubbles and swirls. If you look at a complementary color chart, or sometimes there's a style chart for website colors and things like that, you can see some nice color combinations. If you need ideas, that's a great place to look. In this case, we have the kind of mustard yellow background with an orangey red and a light blue speckle on it. If you do enough speckles, it just turns into all kind of a multicolored speckled thing. So you could do, for example, 3 or 4 different kinds of blue and just do speckle over speckle over speckle until the whole thing is full. I would recommend doing a base coat, though, just to avoid any little white bits, unless that's what you're going for. So we are all colored up. Looking good. Next step, we need to start to level out that spine in preparation for putting the case on the book, the front and back covers. And in this instance, we're putting on a hard spine as well. Sometimes it's a soft one that doesn't have board on it, but this one will have board on it. Something about a smaller book that's got a really strong hard cover with some thickness on it is quite pleasing. So we're going here with the width of the spine measured out. We're going to get a strip of greyboard of the appropriate width. And what we want to do is build up the spine a little bit. Not those end pieces, but one in from the end. We're going to mark the gap between the sewing portions, because we want to put something in there that lifts it up to about the level of the humps on those sewn bits, so that we can glue a piece the length of the spine and it gets adhesion all the way along. Line it up with the lines on my cutting board so I can make sure we have square pieces. Not squares, but square angles. So with our pieces all squared up, I'm going to number them. They should be uniform, but with different books you can have different arrangements of tapes, and sometimes just having little bits build up around the cutting board, one can get confused. So labeling, numbering things is always a nice way to keep confident that everything is where it should be. Can be pretty liberal with the glue here. You want it to kind of fill in those trenches, those grooves in between the signatures. And don't worry if it's not really stuck on at this point while it's wet, because we're going to give it some help in a moment once we get all four of them on there. I need to shout out those vinyl brushes, those yellow brushes I'm using for the glue. I again forgot them out and they dried right up. Drop them in a little bit of water and they just loosen up again and work just good as new. I have a little one and then a slightly wider one, and they were really good purchases. So we'll give that a little press down, and as the moisture gets in, it curves a little bit around the spine. This isn't a very curved spine, but it has a little bit of an arch to it. So we'll get those seated in there and get the glue pressed around. There we go. Now, as I said, we're going to give it a little bit of help. So we'll put away the glue for now and bring out the string. Those little screws that I added to this board are really handy for this. A very cheap solution that's quite versatile. I think if I were to do it again, or I might even just add a few more screws to the side so there are even more options. Keep in mind, if you're working on a table without a cutting board, the screws can scrape up the table. So you want to make sure that you have an area to work in where accidents can happen and it doesn't cost you a dining room table. So the little knot that sailors use to tie ropes to cleats works really well. I'm sure there's a YouTube video on that. And those are held down to dry. Even 20 minutes later they'll be secure, but if you leave them a couple of hours or even overnight, it's nice to have them nice and hard set in there. Strings come off and we can have another look. There are so many stages in making a book from scratch or in redoing a book like this that are really satisfying when you get there. And starting to put on the cover is one of them. But we're going to back up a little bit because the leather came in. I had a look at it. I had an interesting conversation with the First Lady in which she mentioned something about purple, and Napoleon would have really liked that because it's the color of emperors and things like that. And it got me thinking, you know what? I need to change the color on this book to suit the subject of the book a bit better. Even though I've come to quite like this color, this kind of yellow with the dappled colors on it, I think for this particular book, we need to go a slightly different direction. So, on comes the purple base. Napoleon may have rolled over in his grave. Maybe he's rolling back. I'm thinking that's better. I was just thinking it's a little book. And Napoleon actually wasn't a little man. He was pretty average for his time period. I think he was 5'7". I don't know offhand, but same height as Lord Nelson, I believe. But it was just a little bit of political trash talk that they talked about him being little and of very ill health and that sort of thing. But I think he was pretty normal for someone of his social class. And as far as health goes, I think there was some hard living there. That's a really nice, rich, dark feel for this book. But that's not enough. Not for an emperor. Let's spackle some gold on here. The gold is not an easy one to spackle because the gold, the liquefied gold paint is very kind of gooey and jelly almost. So it doesn't flick off the paintbrush very well. It took some vehement flicking. So now I have a gold speckled mat. But look at the effect of that. That's quite nice. So with our sides repainted and our spine leveled, we want to put on a structural item that's quite important. A structural item which was pretty new in 1822, and that's these machine-made Endbands. I had planned to sew one from scratch, which for the 300-year-old books I will do, but this one's only a 200-year-old book. Sounds like a lot, but it was in the midst of kind of a mechanical revolution, industrial revolution things, and they were making these pre-made Endbands. And I think it would have been quite, I'm not sure if trendy is the word, but kind of cutting-edge technology at the time in the bookbinding industry, and I think they'd have looked at it like a fancy feature. Whereas today we look at handmade things that way. They would have looked at machine-made things as quite novel and something to kind of brag about. So here I'm putting on a nice level piece of board. And again, not to the ends. I leave the end sections open because leather is going to be folded over the spine at the end and it's going to need some room to sit in there. To prevent that from sliding down or being really creased by the string, I fire a thin metal ruler over there and I strap the ruler down over top of it, which keeps everything level but allows pressure to be pushed down evenly along the length of it. It won't be hilly or warbled. It should be quite flat. Now, as I'm looking here, you'll see the little gaps at the end. We'll take our ruler off and have a look. Again, you'll notice I labeled that piece of board that was the spine so that I didn't accidentally toss it into the scraps for reuse later. And we almost forgot the bookmark. I say we. I almost forgot the bookmark. And so I am sneaking it in here after the fact underneath the long board for the spine, which I didn't get on film. Got ahead of myself there. But you'll see that in the lessons, in the custom journal. Nice little snip, and we have our glued in bookmark, which will be even more solid in there once we get the leather on. So our basic text block with our spine board, we're ready to go. Thanks everybody for subscribing, for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.